So we are in the midst of Advent. This is Gaudete in the midst of the darkness, in the midst of the darkest part of the year. I was thinking about this last night as I was sitting with Sherry, a dear parishioner, and her family outside one of the intensive care units at Centera Norfolk General Hospital. Just down the hall, her husband was struggling with a life-threatening illness. And I've been here with this family before, and I've grown to love them. Times like these bring out the best in them, the best love, the best support, and the very best of their faith. And we spoke to one another with unveiled hearts. You know, it's funny, isn't it? When our days are the darkest, when life seems frightening and bleakest, we somehow find life lived at the deepest levels of the heart. I recall one of the first times I learned this many years ago. I was a young hospital chaplain in my early to mid-20s, and I was doing a chaplaincy training in Maryland. One of the early patients I saw was a young man about the same age as myself, who one day had pulled a bullet through his head. And I, feeling so unprepared, had been called in to be with the traumatized and grief-stricken family for several days as we talked and wept and remembered and all the things you do to come to terms with a tragedy of overwhelming proportions such as this. I had been with them night and day, but I never felt that I had the words or the experience or the personality or the faith even that they needed from me. All I could do was to pray with them and for them, and to pray for myself, barely an adult, that I would be a channel for God to give them what they needed in and through me. Isn't that funny how we are sometimes? We're called into things for which we feel so completely unprepared. It's so frightening. And yet we have to be there. We have to step in. We have to be there for others. One afternoon, the young man's little brother and I were standing silently by the bedside right before life support was removed. It was the last time he would see his brother. And the boy was a kind of taciturn country kid, and hardly 2 words had passed between us over the previous days. He had sat off in the corner of the room, not knowing really what to do or what to say at such a moment. I put my arm around his shoulder and just stood there with him for a number of minutes. And then we turned to leave. And as we were going out the door, the boy turned to me and said, "When you have helped me more than anyone has helped me in my entire life." I was both astonished and deeply moved by that. And I wondered about that moment for months and years afterwards. To this day, I don't recall saying anything particularly comforting or helpful to that young man. But what I came to realize upon reflection was that I had simply been there with him hour after hour, there to be an interruption to the unceasing sadness with the promise that there was a way through, there was a dawn to this terrible darkness. My presence and willingness to be there with them was enough for God to use, enough to point to a divine love and a grace sufficient to carry this family through the most horrible night anyone could fathom. And God used my own humanity, my own young, faltering prayers, and often wordless, awkward presence to part the tumultuous seas of their grief and help them to begin again, to find a way, a safe and healing path through to their new life on the other side of this overwhelming trauma. And others were there and would be there as well. Friends and families, strangers with acts of kindness, with food and friendship and mercy. Yesterday I heard one of the religious leaders in Newtown reflecting on that whole experience there over this past year and what happened after the news media and the lights and the cameras left. And he said it was so lonely. But he said that our prayers and our presence, journeying with one another, parted the way and helped all find a way through the terrible trauma they had just undergone. The people to whom Isaiah spoke the words today were people trapped in another kind of trauma. It was the trauma of a foreign power that suddenly threatened to overwhelm their meager resources. And Isaiah presented the possibility that even though it seemed like their backs were up against the walls, that there was a way through. But it was not just any way, it was a highway, a highway. The word means a safe, smooth path that is embanked, it's protected. And he goes on to say it is a holy way through the darkness and the wilderness and the suffering. A holy way. It means a way in which there is a channel for grace to come. And it is a way open to all, even the foolish and the weak. Thanks be to God, because that describes me most of the time. I can't find my way out of a paper bag. And to Isaiah and Jerusalem, the name of that overwhelming power that they faced was Assyria. That was their big, threatening, terrorist power in those days. But each of us has a name for that power that threatens to overwhelm us or traumatize us or hurt us. Might be an external force, it might be an internal force. For some, it might be cancer. I have cancer, said someone to me recently. I can't take it in. Or it might be a disappointment. Someone said, my child didn't turn out to be what I expected. And we could hear the disappointment in their voice. Or it might be someone I know and love who recently had a stroke and can only move one side now. Or it could be old age that many of us are facing. Less years ahead, weakness and pains we didn't know before. It might be an old resentment that comes up and haunts us and colors our vision of our life and our reactions. Or it could be a loss of a loved one that is felt particularly poignantly this Christmastide. No matter how much we try to pray our way around it like Jesus, saying in Gethsemane, Lord, I don't want to drink this cup, we know that we have to go through it. It's there. But the Spirit is saying in this breakthrough message of Isaiah 35, speaking directly as a voice crying in our wilderness, there is a way. There is a way through, even when there seems to be no way, even when there seems to be no end to it. There is a way, and it breaks into the darkness like that rose candle breaks into the dark purples of the Advent. And it is a holy way full of extraordinary grace that God imparts through ordinary people and ordinary actions like us and like what we do. A way through that becomes a two-way highway for God to come to us with all God's comforting power and to lead us to another side of the wilderness that is a deeper place of grace and love and peace. So how do we begin this holy way? This highway that Isaiah speaks of when our nights are long and the wilderness is baffling? It's this way. Here it is. It's the way that leads up to the altar, where you and I can bring our hurts and our anxieties, our fears and our losses and our disappointments, where you and I can bring what we carry right to the altar of God, and where, like bread and wine, it's blessed. And then we're sent forth. And this way, this aisle of this great church stretches out beyond the tower and beyond the doors to the way that is our life, a highway of grace for us. A rose candle burning in the midst of the night sky, so that we are never alone and that there's always a way through, no matter how dark the night or how cold the days.